You're listening to Wordslinger Podcast episode 125, Dirty Deeds with Armand Rosamilia. This episode of the Wordslinger Podcast is brought to you by Draft to Digital. Convert your manuscript, distribute it online, and get support the whole way at drafttodigital.com.
It's the Wordslinger Podcast, where story matters. Build your brand, write your book, redefine who you are. It's all about the story here. What's yours? Now, here's the guy who invented Pants Optional, Kevin Tomlinson, the Wordslinger.
Wordslinger.
That's right. If you've gotten lost from the guided tour, you are now listening to the Wordslinger Podcast. So, how's everybody doing? I'm just kind of chilling right now. It's been this has been a busy week. There's a lot going on. Now, I sort of announced some of this last week. If you tuned in to the very end of the episode, you heard some announcements. And I think I'm going to start doing that. It's my way of getting you to listen into the end there. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll do it. I do actually have something I'll pimp at the end, part of the housekeeping stuff. But for the most part, what's going on is I'm doing kind of I'm re-examining Wordslinger Podcast in light of some things that have happened in my life, in my wife's life. That's a tough thing to say. The life of my wife. Very tough to say. Long story short, Kara, my wife, my beautiful wife, came to me a week or so ago. Couple of weeks ago, I think, and she said, she was interested she wanted to do something. She had become intrigued by the idea of affiliate marketing, and I've done some affiliate marketing, and I know a bit. I know enough to be dangerous, really, but there were things I wanted to do. There were strategies I had in mind that I had never gotten around to. So her taking an interest in it was kind of a kick in the pants for me. There's things that I've promised over and over and over again. if you've listened to the show for any length of time, there's some things that I've promised in regard to the show that I've just never gotten around to. I never made them a priority, and so I never got them done. I kind of fell into that rut of, everything works well enough, so let's not mess with it. Not a good place to be, honestly. And not when I recommend things to people, to authors or whatever, I wouldn't tell them, get to a point where you're good enough and then stay there. Maybe get to a point where you're good enough and launch and publish and, take that first dramatic step, but I wouldn't tell you to just stay there forever. You should always look to improve what you're doing. The Wordslinger Podcast has been a big influence, I think. I get emails. I've gotten so many emails in the past week alone. Emails and people popping in on Facebook Messenger, that sort of thing, Twitter, just telling me they heard an episode recently. They really appreciated the content. They were very excited about things, and all this kind of feeds. I do believe in certain like the law of attraction and that sort of thing. I do believe this that you attract things into your life, and I think that recent shifts in what I've been doing, focusing sort of on developing a more disciplined way of thinking. I think that's been drawing some of this stuff to me. So here's what's happening. The shorter version is that I'm retooling Wordslinger Podcast. Don't worry about the content changing or anything. It's still about finding that behind the scenes story, talking to authors and entrepreneurs, getting you useful information. Basically, I'm following my mission statement, which is to tell stories that inform, inspire, educate, and entertain. And that's been at the heart of this from the start, but it's been evolving as I go, and I like that. And I want that to continue to evolve. So here's the deal. I'm finally getting around to building the dedicated website for wordslingerpodcast.com. This is me making public commitments, by the way. Something I don't like to do. But I am building the website. So eventually, soon, I think, as soon as you whenever you go to wordslingerpodcast.com, you'll actually be able to go to the dedicated page, where there will be some features, some cool features you'll dig. I'm going to add some stuff as I go over time, but I'm kind of getting off the ground with some really initially very cool features. Refining how some of the things work. The biggest thing I'm running into right now is getting all the old episodes onto the new site. I may have to. There's no easy way to do that with Squarespace, unfortunately, which I think is dumb. If anyone listening works with Squarespace, has any influence with Squarespace, lacking the ability to transfer blog posts and podcast episodes from one website to another within that same environment, that's a dumb thing. Get on that, fix that. But I'm working around it. So that's one of the things I'm working on. You may have noticed the new cover art, the really cool logo and everything, which I like much better. I finally managed to update it on iTunes. Figured out what the problem was there. Very picky about the specific size of that artwork, iTunes. Has to be 1400 by 1400, and they won't accept anything larger or smaller. They'll just continue using the old artwork, which is why this entire time it's been like the original artwork, where everywhere else it was different. But much better artwork. You see my beautiful mug on the cover there. I'm linking everything under the same sort of branding as what I do with my writing, because I changed the name of the show slightly. It's actually now the long version is best-selling and award-winning thriller author Kevin Tumlinson's Word Slinger podcast, and that's not how I'll ever announce it anywhere, but that's what the logo art says. So there's more of a focus on pointing out to people that that's what I am and who I am. So there is that. I'm adding a few features. We're going to have a pretty robust resources page, which I've kind of got cobbled together on the on my home page right now, but we can do better. And I need to get it out of that environment anyway and make it something a little more focused on you guys. You're going to find some great tools there. I can't wait till that's together. So that's how things are going. I'm already working on this. I know I've said it a million times, but now it's actually on the list, and I'm being nagged to do it by my wife. So that means it'll get done. But I'm going to retool the Patreon campaign, the Patreon page. That's going to take a little time. I'll be honest, because there's video involved. There's tiers I have to build. I have one in mind already that I think you're going to dig. I think I announced this actually. I'm doing something called the Word Slinger After Show, where after the call stops with these interviews, I start it back up again, and I ask a couple of questions for 5 to 10 minutes, and we get a whole different, we get a bit of extra content. So that'll be one of the tiers you can buy into. So I'm excited about that. We're learning, man. We're doing some stuff. I think you're going to dig it. I've also got a whole thing I'm pulling together called hashtag Kevin Quotes Kevin, which let's get that trending. And it's, the little quirky, weird things I say that people laugh at or whatever. Sometimes they're not funny. Sometimes they're more about inspiration. But I started gathering those up. You may have, if you follow me on Facebook, you may have seen me ask about this. But if there's ever been a turn of phrase that I've said that you thought was interesting in some way, funny or inspirational or whatever, feel free to reach out and let me know about it, because I'm gathering those up. Now, part of that is a dedicated Twitter feed with that hashtag, and the idea is to it's about pointing people back at my work, but I'm also planning to pull together some merchandise around these things, just fun stuff, t-shirts, coffee mugs, that kind of thing. So you'll be able to pick some of that up soon. So these are the tentative plans. They're not tentative. These are the plans. These are the plans that are in the works right now. I've got a huge, major checklist of things. Kara and I sit down once a week, have a little business planning session, go through all that, take a look at what's working, what isn't. Add stuff, which is kind of scope creep, but we're managing it, and I think you're going to see some big, huge benefit come out of that as far as the Word Slinger podcast goes. If you're a fan of the show already, I think you're going to get a lot more out of it in the future. If you're just tuning in for the first time, you're coming in at the right time. I mean, I think this is going to be. I think it's going to grow into something really big. Now, on that note, for the first time, for some reason, I never did this before, but you can actually follow the Word Slinger podcast on Twitter. You can follow me at Kevin Tomlinson. You can also follow the Word Slinger podcast. It's at Word Slinger Pod, because that's as many characters as it would let me do. So, at Word Slinger Pod will get you on. Will allow you to follow this show on Twitter. You can also check in to the Word Slinger podcast page on Facebook, and then join the conversation there. And I keep going back and forth about possibly starting a Facebook group. I was hoping the page would become this, but a place for people to just sort of check in and ask questions, that maybe something they want to see on the air, or further dive into topics from the show, or just meet and hang out with each other. I mean, I think it would be kind of cool. You let me know if you think that's something that would be useful, and I'm trying to think of why I need that versus the actual page, but I know there are different benefits to each. So you let me know, but be sure to hop on and follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, and everywhere. And stay tuned, because there's some big stuff coming up. I mean, I'm going to keep you in the loop through all of it. I'm not really hiding. I'll have some secret special announcements from time to time, but most of those will go at the end of the episode. So anyway, all right. Well, we're 12 minutes in. Sorry about that. We're going to talk to a great guy, actually, Armand Rosamilia. Sorry, Armand Rosamilia. He's among other things, he's an author. He's got a ton of books out. At the time that I interviewed him, he had 4 books coming out in that same month. It's just remarkable. But he also has not just a podcast, but a whole podcast network. And he had me on his show, which was a great experience. So without keeping you any longer, let's dive in. Let's chat with Armand, and I think you're going to dig it. So, Dirty Deeds, man. I know everybody's singing the song right now, right? I almost sang it myself, so I spared you. And hang on, and I'll talk to you just after this interview. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm talking to a fellow podcaster. That's always fun for me, but he's also the author of the Dirty Deeds crime thriller series, which I do want you to check out. I'm talking to Armand Rosamilia, who is, as I just said, he's the author of the Dirty Deeds crime thriller series, and we're going to talk about that and a few other things. So first, welcome to the show, Armand.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. You and I pass in the night, I think, frequently. I've had a couple of authors mention you to me, and talk about your show. So I'm happy to have you on, man.
I've also had the same on the other end, where they've said, "Hey, this is a cool podcast you need to check out, and hopefully you'll get interviewed on." So it's kind of cool to finally be here.
We need to do a little swap. Trade of services. So let's start there. Actually, let's talk about your show a little. I do definitely want to get to your books, but let's talk about your show and what it's all about.
I actually have 2 different podcasts. I do Armcast podcast, which is basically me interviewing. It used to be just horror authors, but then I've expanded it into other genres, also filmmakers, actors, other podcasters, pretty much whoever I find entertaining that I want to talk to.
Right.
We celebrate 150 episodes as we're recording this. So it's been a good 3-year run. I came from AM and then FM radio for a couple of years before that, and this was kind of the natural progression I saw for me to do. And then I also do a podcast called the Mondo Method Podcast with fellow author Chuck Buda, and he's a newer author. He's only been writing, I guess, full time for about a year now, and he's a huge fan of mine, which is always good for the ego. And we met a couple of times, and we started talking, and I said it would be great to do a podcast where the newer guy and someone who's been doing it, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been writing, full time for about 6 years now.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can come up with a balance, and I'll teach you things, and it ends up that he teaches me a lot of this stuff, even though we're the same age.
Right.
Promotion wise and publishing wise, he's like a little kid, and I'm like the old man yelling, "Get off my lawn!" So
Right.
we definitely teach each other a lot of different things, which I think is great.
Yeah, and I don't know him personally, but Chuck and I are connected on Facebook, and we're in some of the same running the same circles, so I know him fairly well enough. So he's a pretty good guy. I actually like him. Yeah,
he's a lot of fun to be around.
That whole sort of mentor-mentee kind of arrangement, I think, works out well for everybody. I've talked to several people who have kind of that approach, like sort of the old and new. I hate to say it like that, but the person who's been around for a while, and they're introducing the new guy, but the new guy is the one that usually has all the enthusiasm and goes out and finds all the latest stuff.
Yeah.
So it makes for a nice balance.
And it gives you a nice little kick, nice little boost when somebody is so excited about something. For me, I put out a book like 4 years ago called Keyport Cthulhu, and it's Lovecraftian, set in a little fishing village in New Jersey, kind of like around where I grew up. And the book never really did all that well.
Right.
And Chuck was a huge fan of this book, and so much talking about it all the time and saying, you got to bring it back out. It was out of print for a little while. And Chuck actually wrote a couple of short stories set in that world. Oh. And I put the book out again. I did a revised and expanded edition and added a couple of short stories, new ones myself. And it was like, I would have never even thought about that because I have so many releases. Right. But because he was so excited about it and wanted to play in that world, we came to, let's just do it. And it's doing really. It's probably sold more books in the 2-3 weeks it's been out than it did the entire time it was out. So.
Isn't that typical though? But sometimes, this is what I tell authors a lot, is that sometimes the timing is what makes the whole book. I mean maybe you've got something that's been sitting on the shelf that, never felt like it was right. But then all of a sudden, here you are, and it's your best-selling work, I've seen that happen to people.
I wish we could figure out the secret formula here, so I wouldn't waste my time putting out books that aren't going to make me millions of dollars.
Man, if I had that formula, we wouldn't be talking right now.
And that's what I always say. Everyone always says, when are you going to stop the podcast? I said, when I hit my first million, I'm basically going to give everyone the finger and disappear.
I keep thinking about it because there's a part of me that thinks like that, like, oh man, once I hit a certain level, that's it. But then I'll get an email from somebody who listens to the podcast, and they're just so excited and so enthusiastic and happy about what they're learning, and then I think, wow, it wouldn't hurt to keep doing it for a little while.
Yeah. And there's that, it works with being an author and being a podcaster.
Right.
You get that enthusiasm. You get somebody who starts sending you questions or asking you questions, or a lot now. You get people who are trying to do their own podcast,
right? Which
is really awesome. I've helped a lot. I've helped 4 or 5 in the last year or two to start up their podcast. And actually, there was a network called Project iRadio that I was on with both podcasts. And the guy who ran it, Jess, just got so busy. He had a new job. He's a recruiter for a very huge company in video gaming. And basically, I bought the network from him. And it was great because those podcasts got to go in, so I brought you in, and now I actually get to work with you, and we all get to hopefully, continue to do this for a long time.
Yeah. So, okay. So you like me, I actually was in radio, for just a bit. And, so that does seem like a natural progression, but why did you land on doing the podcast in the first place? Like, what made you decide I need to have a couple of podcasts out there?
Well, what happened was when I was on, I was on AM, and it was a buddy of mine who had basically opened a tiny little station, literally on a pier on the beach in Flagler Beach and here in Florida. And he was looking for DJs. He was looking for something. So me and another author, we did like a Friday Night Writes, we called it, like a show, like a 2-hour show where we would interview other authors in the area because there's a ton of different authors and stuff like that. And then after that, I would do like 2 hours of playing music.
Yeah.
But it was a Friday night, and now I'm leaving there at like midnight, and my eyes aren't that great, and I have night blindness, which I realized doing that. And it would kill most of my Saturday because it was like an hour and a half drive away. When I got married, I moved up to Jacksonville, which is about, an hour and a half. I was no longer 10 minutes away.
Right.
And we weren't getting paid. I mean, you're FM, you're doing it for the love, but it just got to the point. And we had a conversation and I quit. And literally like 2 weeks later, I had posted about it. And 2 weeks later, a guy who was doing like an internet heavy metal station sent me a message and said, "Hey, I know you're into this stuff. Do you want to bring your show over to my online?" So I did. And I did that for about 3 or 4 months, but all it was playing music.
Right.
So there wasn't a lot of talking. It was introducing stuff. And I said, let's figure something, let me figure something out. And then I had listened to a few podcasts. And I went to a World Horror Convention in Atlanta about 3 years ago, and they were setting up. And there's Brian Keene and Jonathan Maybury and Charlene Harris, and they're all being interviewed by these strange dudes that look like me and with all this equipment. And I started talking to them, and I said, "Hey, I had only been doing Armcast for maybe like 15 or 20 episodes at that point." And they said, "Well, join our network and I was paying for it. Well, now they're going to pay for it and we'll do advertising and all this other stuff." So I loved it. And I jumped right in. And within 6 months, I started doing a second podcast with another author, which actually after almost a year of that fell through. And that's when me and Chuck basically just moved right in to that. My wife always yells, she's like, "Why are you you got a full-time writing career, you're running an actual podcast network now, and you're doing 2 podcast shows every week. So where's the give?" And I say, "Well, that's sleeping or, watching television."
Right. Yeah. Trust me, I do quite a few podcasts. It gets noted a lot, and it's time consuming, but it is rewarding. It's funny though. I find myself kind of getting, not trapped, I guess, but for lack of a better term, I kind of get trapped into doing these, and then before I know it, I've got 4 or 5, whatever, and they take up a lot of time, but I'm always reluctant to walk on any of them, because people come to depend on it, So that's cool, man. I have not had the experience of someone saying, "Hey, why don't you join our network and we'll pay for everything?" That would be kind of nice.
It's a lot of fun, and then of course I'm very creative. So like everything's just scattered all over the place for me. But my wife is a commercial property manager. So when we started dating 4 years ago, she made me spreadsheets, and I have dry erase boards on the wall, and I have a schedule, and everything is all nice and organized for me. And we do a lot of conventions and a lot of book signings. In a couple of weeks, we're doing 4 different book signings back up in New Jersey, where I grew up. Yeah. At breweries, which is awesome, with a bunch of other authors. But she pretty much put a lot of that together and was kind of the one who said, "Hey, while we're up there, it's our anniversary, we're going away, but let's also make this part of your work stuff too." Right. So she does all that. And when we started doing when I took over the podcast network, she said, "I'm going to handle all of the bills, the advertising. I'm going to handle all of that stuff because that's what she loves to do. She loves to number crunch and everything." So every now and then I just say, "Hey, can I run an ad, or how are we doing? Or, we want to add this new podcast or whatever." And then we have our meeting over while we're, eating dinner, and it works out nicely because she does not like any of the creative stuff. She could care less what the podcasts are necessarily about or anything. She looks at me and goes, "Okay, how can we get advertising? What kind of advertisers will work on these shows, and how much money are we spending for all these massive amounts of gigabytes every month and all that?" So
right. That's cool, man. My wife is pretty sharp about that sort of thing, but we haven't gotten to a point where she can help me with it yet. So we're working on that. So that's handy. You've got kind of your own built-in like business manager.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I feel bad because she works a full-time job and she travels a lot for work. So whenever I can grab her and start talking.
Yeah. That's cool though. Eventually, maybe things will blow up enough if she can do that full time if she wants.
We've joked about that, and she's the kind of person that has to work. She has to keep busy. She has to have an actual job.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same, and I'm sure with you too, as a writer or as a podcaster, if I made no money doing this, I'd still be doing it because it's just part of my DNA. It's something that I love to do. I can't imagine not interviewing people and not, talking shop. And I can't imagine not writing, not sitting down and having my daily goal every day and every week and every month and every year and all that. I mean, it's just part of who I am.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And to just be clear, for the most part, I've always done the work without being paid. So that's your proof of passion, I guess.
Yeah.
These days I get money for everything, but it's, it's not like it's a ton of money, and it's still more a labor of love. So,
Yeah.
Okay. So you do this stuff. When, the obvious question is, when do you actually find time to write if you're doing this stuff all the time?
I do this thing called it started out as I had talked to Jonathan Maybury.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that his writing process is he writes at the top of the hour, he writes for 45 minutes.
Right.
And then that last 15 minutes, he takes a break and he plays on email, goes to the bathroom, gets a cup of coffee, whatever he's got to do. So I started doing that, going, it used to be, let me sit here for 2 hours and write 500 words. And then when I started doing that, I tweaked it over a few months, and I found out that if I write for the first 15 minutes of the hour, I average about 600 words. Okay. Because I know I have a debt. Okay, I have to I'm looking at the clock the whole time. I have to finish this by 10:15.
Right.
And it's usually like part of a chapter or at least a scene or whatever in that story that I'm writing. And I joked around. I called it the Mondo method. My real name's Armando, so everybody growing up called me Mondo. So I called it the Mondo method. I thought it was catchy, and that's where the podcast name came from. Chuck said, "Oh, we got to use that."
Yeah.
So that's how I write. So I will write 2 or 3 sprints a day. That's really it. But I'm doing I'm still getting my word count in. My word count is 1,096 words a day. Mm-hmm. Is my goal, and that equals 400,000 words for the year.
Yeah,
and as long as I hit that, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. That's the method, man. I mean, coming back to it each day, having a set number of words that you're targeting each day. That's the advice I give everyone. That's how you get a book done. That's cool.
I think a lot of new authors and a lot of people who want to write, they look at it and go, I need to write a 75,000 word book. Right. And I say, no, you don't. You need to write 500 words today.
Right. It is kind of a revelation. And that's curious. And maybe you've thought about this a little more than I have, because I've kind of wondered about it, like why people fall into that sort of trap. And it is sort of it's a matter of looking too far down the road, I guess. Concentrating too much on the end product rather than the means of getting there. But how do you think about it?
Well, it took me a long time to get to that point. I think what helped me is when I started dating my wife, and I remember having a conversation, and she said, "Well, how many words do you write a day?" And I'm like, "I don't know, a lot." And she's like, "Well, how do you keep track of it?" I'm like, "No, I just know, hey, I got to write this book in 2 months or 3 months or whatever."
Right.
So she said, why don't you keep track of it for a couple of weeks just to see? So she made me a just really easy spreadsheet. And when I really started putting it in, I'm like, wow, I'm writing like 300, 400 words a day.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything. So I really started using it, and it gave me, and I also started on Facebook a couple of years ago. I started posting.
Yeah.
How many words I had just done and stuff like that. And people would go, great. Or people would go, what are you doing? You're wasting time. Or if I don't post. So, it really keeps me honest, where every day I can do, first, hashtag Mondo method.
Right.
For Tuesday, 620 words in 15 minutes, hashtag am writing. I mean, that's I do that. And if I do that the 3 or 4 times a day, people respond to it, and it keeps me like, okay, people are paying attention. I have to do that. But it took me so long to do that. Yeah. And especially when I started getting busy with deadlines and contracts and everything else, that was where it really, I would go, I've been writing, I write like 4 or 5 different things at once.
Right.
I have always have 4 or 5 projects open at once that I'm writing on. And then I realized, wow, I haven't written on this one in 2 weeks. But with the spreadsheets and everything and keeping track of it, and now I go, okay, I haven't jumped into this in 3 days. And now looking at my board, I'm behind. Let me jump back into whatever book I'm doing, or a deadline's coming up.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I think it's interesting. Whenever I talk to a lot of authors. I talked to Dean Wesley Smith just a week or 2 ago. I've talked to Jonathan Mayberry, and ultimately there's a similarity in the way we get things done. Eventually we kind of come to the same general area, tracking your words. I have a spreadsheet that I use every day. I pull my word count. I have, my starting and ending word count. I have the starting and ending time. It gives me all that data that I can look at. And I'm not really that good with that kind of data, honestly. But it is very cool to see it go and see how I'm doing. And then the other things that you were talking about, the sort of your target method and all that. I think it's interesting that professional writers sort of all evolve in that same direction.
You really have to find that. It's kind of like finding your voice. You write a bunch of, if you started 12 years old, which is when I started writing, reading Dean Koontz books, and boom, that was it. I was going to be a writer at 12, and it took me 40 years to get there. But you obviously, the stuff I wrote as a teenager and now, or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I've evolved and I've progressed, and I've found my voice right now, the best I can actually write at this moment. And it's the same with putting together your schedule and your spreadsheets and the way you do things and the way you handle this.
Yeah.
One of the things me and Chuck talked about from the beginning when we started the Mondo method is he was kind of writing in a vacuum. He was writing and putting stuff out it felt like every 2 weeks he had a new book out.
Right.
Because all he was doing was writing and writing and writing, but he wasn't selling any of them. He was just self-publishing a bunch of books. And I said, wait a few months until you start to get known, and all this other stuff is going to get in the way of your actual writing, and you need to be ready for that. And that's kind of where we are right now after about 6 months or so into the podcast, where he's having a tough time adjusting to, hey, I'm not writing 80% of my day now. I'm writing 20% of my day.
Right. Yeah, that's that makes things tough, especially if you've gotten used to having all that time. Of course, a lot of people have all that time and they're not very productive. So maybe it works out. But so tell me about Dirty Deeds, crime thrillers. What's let's start digging in on that. What's the premise there?
Well, the original idea was very, very dark. I tend to write mostly horror stuff.
Yeah.
And it's usually very character driven, but very dark, very realistic. People are bad
yeah.
In a lot of my books. And I wanted to write this really dark, like a hitman type of story. And my wife watches religiously Investigation Discovery Channel.
Okay.
I mean, every show she tapes, every show, and we watch it like all night. We're watching these shows, but I get a ton of ideas for stuff.
Yeah.
And so the original premise was a guy who was trying to cope with himself because he's basically being hired by people to kill children, by like rock stars and senators and whoever, like illegitimate kids, things like that. And it was a real dark idea. And I started playing with it, and I realized, wait a minute, what if this guy really didn't actually kill these children? What if he rescued them? and gave them new lives.
Okay.
And that was the premise for Dirty Deeds. And I also wanted to I wanted to write something with humor in it, without profanity, without sex, without over-the-top violence. I wanted it to be more mainstream, mass market. That basically was what I was going for.
Yeah.
And I wrote it, and I happened to see Kindle Scout had just started up, where they were taking basically submissions, and if they accepted your book, which was a long shot because there was thousands of submissions every day, but if they took your book, you got a Kindle Press contract for the book, and $1,500 advance, and the marketing of Amazon behind you. And I put Dirty Deeds up, and it actually won, and the book came out last February, and it did amazing. A lot of reviews, not only a lot of sales on that book, but a lot of sales on my backlist, which is over 100 releases.
Right.
So all of a sudden, across the board, everything doubled, which was amazing. Awesome. And again, you have that marketing, whereas you put up a book in Amazon yourself and you get 7 keywords.
Right.
They gave you 25. You're usually in 2 or 3 different categories you can pick. Mm-hmm. I was in 15 different categories. I was on front pages of everything. They run ad. They just ran an ad at the end of March. It's the 2-year anniversary of Kindle Scout, so they ran a 99-cent deal.
Yeah.
And my books, I think it got down to 15,000 in Amazon rankings. Which is probably easily the best I've ever had.
Right.
And I paid the advance back within 3-4 months, and so now I'm just making money with them. I decided with the second book to do it myself because I basically had submitted the book and they wanted it, but they didn't want to put it out. They wanted to wait a year to put it out.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I want to do these every 6 months. I think this is a fast read. When the editor over there read it, they said, oh, my God, this is like Janet Ivanovich or Carl Heisen. Right. And I said, okay, I've never read either of those. My wife is actually a huge Janet Ivanovich fan, and that's why she liked it so much. So that's kind of who they marketed it to, those fans, which I guess was great. And so I just put the second one out 6 months later, and then actually the third one came out. Not too long ago, and then the next one, the fourth one, I'm almost done with, and that's my goal, to put 2 out every month, and it's just funny. It's a quick read. It's 50,000 words, and it's just, for me, it's a lot of fun, especially because I'm still writing a lot of horror stuff. I'm still writing a lot of, and it's not absurdist supernatural stuff. A lot of times, it's actually horror because real people are doing horrible things to each other.
Right.
Story. So this is nice and light, and I get to put some jokes and stuff in, and it's first person, and the characters has a lot of my quirks and personality in it.
Yeah. You hit on something that I tell people all the time, which I feel justified now, but that once that book went out and was discovered, suddenly your backlist was being bought up too. That's remarkable because it's exactly what I tell people will happen, but it's hard to point at examples. But it sounds like you're the proof now. I'll just start pointing people your way. That's cool. Yeah. See, that's exactly right. I mean, you start that, and it's justification also for all that time you spent putting out books that no one bought.
Right.
Suddenly you're making 12 times the amount of money you would make because now you're discovered. So that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, and it's a nice. What's great about that jump is it's stayed steady like that.
Right.
So that's and you always have to look, as an author. You always have to look at this long term. Mm-hmm. I know a ton of authors got in 2009. That's when I went full time. That Amazon was brand new and ebooks were brand new, and they were just throwing books up at the wall, and we were making tons and tons of money. J.A. Conrath is a huge example of that, who was one of my mentors with his blog and everything. Over a 3-week period in December of, I think, 2009, or maybe it was the 2010 period, that Christmas break, he made $100,000 in 3 weeks on ebook sales. And it's crazy, but we were all making a lot of money then. It was the Wild West.
Right.
And a lot of those people that came in afterwards thought they were going to see that money, and they never did. And they didn't look at this as a long term. So like all that backlist of books that we have, that's your long term investment.
Right.
To hopefully get some steady sales, even if it's a trickle, even if it's 2 or 3 sales a month, it doesn't matter. It's still a couple of bucks.
Yeah. How many books do you have out right now?
I actually took a lot of the serialized stuff down, but I think I have 125 releases on Amazon.
Man, that you've put me to shame, man. You've got like 3 times the volume I have. So cool. That's outstanding. I'm going to catch up with you over the next year, I think.
Well, you know what? I'm writing a lot. I'm writing a lot longer stuff now. Most of that was short stories and novellas.
Yeah.
And I've really I had 2 years in a row where I had 45 releases each year, and then 2 years ago I had 29.
Right.
And then last year was 15, and I think this year will be 12 or 13. That'll be it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Honestly, I've kind of put my chips on short fiction, not just short stories, but shorter novellas and then shorter novels, in the 60,000 word range because they seem to do well for me. So that's my bet, but that doesn't mean it's worthwhile for everyone. But it also allows me to put out a greater volume at high speed. So
yeah, which is important. I mean. The Amazon algorithms and all the other things that will drive you nuts, trying to understand. But that's when I hadn't put out a book at the end of 2016. I had put out I have a zombie series, which is still my biggest seller, called Dying Days. And I put out book 7, the first couple of days of November. But then I had nothing out until the last week of December.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a mistake because all of a sudden the algorithms for Amazon just dropped for me.
Right.
I didn't have anything out in that 30 days, 45 days, which is what they're counting on.
Right.
And it was a huge eye opener for me. It was a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And around Christmas, I didn't have anything new out, which was really stupid.
Yeah. But now and now you're going to make sure you have something every time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're up against time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, man. But I've enjoyed talking to you. It's very gratifying to talk to you, actually, because it sounds like we're kind of on very similar paths. You are seeing out a lot of theory that I talk about frequently. I know this stuff works because I do it, but it's gratifying to be able to talk to someone else who's pulling this off. So congratulations on everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. Hey, it was awesome talking to you. I will. I definitely want you on the other end of this, and I want you on my podcast.
So let's do it, man. I'm in. You count me in anytime. So
perfect.
All right. Well, everybody else, hang out. You'll hear the music start up just any second now, I'm sure, and you will get an update on whatever's going on in the life of the Wordslinger. For all things Armand, you can check out his websites. You can find him on Twitter. We got all this stuff in the show notes. Make sure you go check out his books, all 125 plus and growing of them. Buy every one of them. Just do it all at once and get it over.
You might as well.
You might as well.
That way you don't accidentally miss.
Right, exactly. And get on the mailing list so you can find out about the new releases. So, all right. Thanks a lot, Armand. We'll hang out and we'll chat just a second. Okay.
All right.
All right, everybody. See you next week. Or see you in half a second. I don't know why I do that. I guess because in my mind, I'm wrapping things up for that week's episode. Anyway, a little bit of housekeeping here at the end. I do appreciate you tuning in for this part. This is where all the magic happens. If you would like to, first of all, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Armand because he is a great guy. I follow him on Facebook. We pal around a little, and he actually has introduced me to a couple of folks that are going to be on the show, so which is always great. I love that. But if you want to help support the Wordslinger podcast, there's a couple ways to do that. First of all, you can do it with your questions. If you have questions for me or a guest, feel free to pop in and ask those. You can go to wordslingerpodcast.com and click on the contact button, or you can call me. You can call me at 281-809-WORD. That's 281-809-9673 and leave me a voicemail. And I think there's a limit of 1 minute on that. So I'm kind of looking into how I can transfer that number to something else. Because the system I have, I'm not really all that thrilled with it. But at any rate, and if you want to leave me a voicemail, you can also click on, there's a little orange tab on the right hand side of the screen on wordslingerpodcast.com. You can click on that. It says send voicemail, and that's a service called SpeakPipe, where you can just speak right into your computing device. I think you could do this from your phone as well, but you just click that and it'll let you leave me a voicemail. And I think the limit on that one is like 90 seconds. So 1.5 minutes. So you get a little more talk time. I'm going to be upgrading that too. But if you, see, this is part of this whole Wordslinger podcast redo. Okay. But if you have a question for me, you can leave it there. If you leave your voicemail, make sure you tell me your name and, if you don't want me to read your or play your question on the air, please let me know. I'll just keep it for my own personal benefit. But if you want to have it played on the air, this is your chance. Just tell me who you are so I can attribute it to you. Other than that, everything's good. So that's one way. Now, you can also click on the Patreon button on wordslingerpodcast.com, and you can support the show financially that way. And like I said, I'm going to be upping the ante for this eventually. You do what you like. I mean, if you like the content of the show, I do appreciate it when you throw a couple bucks my way, because that money goes into paying for some of the overhead of the show. For example, even though I am building the site myself, I've got to pay hosting costs and that sort of thing. So that's an additional expense out of the Wordslinger budget, and your dollars help pay for that stuff. So you're basically keeping the show alive when you do that. So I appreciate that. If you feel led to do that, I bless you for it. Now, another way you can support the show is to hop on to iTunes, find the show, search for Wordslinger Podcast, and leave a review. If you leave a review for the show, you can rate it, give it like 4 or 5 stars. What I really love is when people tell me what they're getting from the show, like what they like about the show, why they listen. So that's a great place to do that, and I do read those on the air, unless you say otherwise in the comment. I read those on the air, and they are those are powerful, man. I dig that. I really dig hearing those. So I appreciate when you do that. The final way to support me and my work is to buy my books. Now, I've gone all in. I'm going to do an entire episode about this, I think. I've gone all in on the concept of being a thriller author. Now, I have about 40 books out right now. That's growing. It's more than 40 at this point. But a lot of those are science fiction. My sci-fi trilogy, Citadel. My YA fantasy trilogy, Sawyer Jackson. But, as much as I loved those books, I still love them. I have enjoyed writing thrillers so much, and I've gotten such a big reaction out of it that, I kind of towed the line for a while. Like I didn't get far from the shore. Let's just put it that way. I stayed pretty close because I always thought, well, if this thriller thing doesn't work out, I'll swim on back to sci-fi land, and I was doing at least okay with that, right? But I recently, this is part of my disciplined thought training. I recently reread Think and Grow Rich. There's a story in there where he says he doesn't say who this was, but a king or a great warrior. He leads his men into battle over the sea, and he basically brings the boats ashore, and he burns all the boats, and he tells all of his men, if you want any hope of getting back to your families, getting back to your homes, we have to win this fight. And the illustration there is that, success comes best, you're most motivated towards success if you have no way back, if you have no safety net, if you have no boats to return. You have to win or you never go home. And that's what I decided. I I can't be in the middle. I got to decide and pull that switch and dive in. So I'm a thriller author now. That's what I am. So yeah, there we are. And if you want to support me and support the show, go buy my books. Check out my thrillers. You can buy any of my books, and I appreciate it. But in particular, I'm trying to build up this thriller audience and build up, the revenue from that. So go check me out. If you go to kevintomlinson.com/books, you'll find all my books there, and peruse that library, pick up what you like. You can also get my first thriller, The Coelho Medallion, for free right from that site. All you got to do, you'll have to register. I'm just going to throw that out there and be upfront about it, but you can register, get on my mailing list. And from right there, you'll get a freebie, and hopefully you're hooked for life. Then I've got you. That's how they get you. Anyway, I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Armand Rosamilia, and I'm really thrilled about this new direction for WordSlinger. If you have questions, if you would like to make suggestions, maybe about the Patreon campaign, maybe about features you'd like to see, or whatever you'd like to see happen with the WordSlinger podcast. There's no guarantee it's going to happen, but if you want to make suggestions, I'm always open to that. So feel free to go to wordslingerpodcast.com, click on that contact button, send me an email, and I'm happy to chat back to you. I always respond. It may take me a while sometimes. So some of you who have been waiting, I apologize, but I appreciate you reaching out. I will get back to you. But at any rate, thanks so much for tuning in. God bless each and every one of you. See, my voice is going right now, right in time. But God bless each of you. Hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead. I hope you will tune in next time. I'm sure to have an amazing guest. I always do. So take care, everybody.
Word Slinger.